1,200 meters beneath the South Atlantic, an autonomous underwater vehicle captures footage that should not exist. The wreck of a German U-boat rests on the seafloor off the coast of Argentina. The problem is simple. This submarine was sunk off Norway in 1945. Intelligence records confirmed the kill. The crew is listed as dead in German naval archives. Yet here she sits, 8,000 kilometers from where she was supposed to have gone down, and the cargo still visible in her holds suggests she was not running. The discovery that changed everything. The announcement came in March 2023 from a research team that had been mapping unexplored sections of the Argentine continental shelf. They were looking for geological features, not shipwrecks. What their sonar found was a cylindrical object roughly 76 meters long, resting at a depth that made salvage difficult, but not impossible. The autonomous underwater vehicle descended with cameras and laser scanning equipment. When the images came back, the researchers knew immediately what they were looking at. The conning tower was unmistakable, the deck gun mounting, the general configuration of the pressure hull. This was a Type IX-D2 U-boat, one of the largest and longest-range submarines Germany built during World War II. The location made no sense. U-boats operated in the South Atlantic during the war, but those operations were documented. Patrol routes were logged. Encounters with Allied forces were recorded. This wreck sat in a position that matched no known mission profile. She was too far south, too close to the Argentine coast, and in waters where no U-boat combat action had ever been reported. The research team contacted German naval historians with the coordinates and preliminary images. The response was immediate and unsettling. Based on hull markings partially visible in the scans, the submarine appeared to be U-864, the same U-864 that Royal Navy records stated had been sunk by HMS Venturer off the Norwegian island of Fedje on February 9, 1945. Venturer's attack had been historic. It was the only documented instance of one submerged submarine sinking another while both were underwater. The engagement was studied in naval academies for decades. The wreck of U-864 had been located off Norway in 2003. The Norwegian government had spent years managing the environmental hazard from the mercury she carried. There were photographs, surveys, and detailed analysis of that wreck. Yet here was another U-864 sitting on the seafloor 8,000 kilometers away. Theories formed quickly. Perhaps the Norwegians had misidentified their wreck. Perhaps this wreck off Argentina was misidentified. Perhaps German naval records had confused two different boats. None of these explanations held up to scrutiny. The Norwegian wreck had been positively identified through multiple surveys. Its cargo matched intelligence reports about U-864's mission, and the wreck off Argentina showed features that confirmed she was also a Type IX-D2, a submarine class of which only 30 were ever built. The most uncomfortable explanation was the simplest. German submarines used duplicate identification numbers. The practice was documented but rarely discussed. As the war turned against Germany and boats were lost faster than they could be replaced, some operational submarines were reassigned numbers from boats that had been sunk. It made tracking harder for Allied intelligence. It simplified logistics within the shrinking German fleet, and it meant that the U-boat designation you saw painted on a conning tower might not be the boat's actual identity. If the wreck off Argentina was carrying a duplicate designation, then her real identity was unknown. And if her identity was unknown, then her mission was unknown. And if her mission was unknown, then the question of what she was doing off the coast of Argentina in 1945 or later became deeply disturbing. The submarine that shouldn't exist. The Type IX-D2 was not a typical U-boat. These submarines were built specifically for long-range missions. They stretched 76.7 meters, roughly 25% longer than the more common Type WWII boats that formed the backbone of Germany's Atlantic campaign. Their range exceeded 31,000 nautical miles, enough to circumnavigate the globe if necessary. Only 30 Type IX-D2 boats were ever commissioned. Many never saw combat. They were used as cargo transports, carrying strategic materials and technology between Germany and Japan. The Monsoon Group operated in the Indian Ocean, attacking Allied shipping while serving as floating supply lines. When these boats traveled to the Far East, they carried uranium oxide, mercury, optical equipment, weapons blueprints, and technical specialists. On the return journey, they transported rubber, tungsten, quinine, and other materials that Germany desperately needed. U-864 was one of these boats. She was commissioned in December 1943 and assigned to transport missions almost immediately. Intelligence reports documented her cargo manifest for her final mission: 560 kilograms of mercury stored in steel flasks, jet engine components for the Messerschmitt Me-262, missile guidance systems, 2 Japanese naval officers as passengers. Her destination was Japan. Her route would take her around Norway, through the North Atlantic, and then the long journey south around Africa. She never made it past Norway. On February 9, 1945, HMS Venturer tracked her by sound and fired 4 torpedoes while both submarines were submerged. 1 torpedo found its mark. U-864 broke apart and sank with all hands. 73 men died. The wreck was found in 2003 at a depth of 150 meters. The Norwegian government confirmed the identity through recovered artifacts and hull markings. The mercury flasks were leaking, creating an environmental disaster that required a $100 million containment effort. Case closed. Except that the wreck off Argentina tells a different story. When researchers compared the Argentine wreck to the Norwegian wreck, discrepancies emerged. The Argentine boat showed damage consistent with deliberate scuttling rather than a torpedo impact. Flood holes had been opened deliberately in the forward and aft sections. This was standard procedure for crews that chose to sink their own boat rather than let it be captured. The Norwegian wreck showed catastrophic structural failure consistent with a torpedo detonation. The Argentine wreck was found in an orientation suggesting she had been sunk in relatively shallow water and then slid down a slope to her current resting position. The Norwegian wreck showed no such movement. She had hit the bottom where she sank and stayed there. And then there was the cargo. Preliminary scans of the Argentine wreck showed objects in the cargo hold that did not match the manifest for U-864's known final mission: crates of a size and shape inconsistent with mercury flasks, sealed containers that appeared designed for document storage rather than industrial materials, and most disturbing, what appeared to be passenger accommodations in sections of the boat that should have been devoted entirely to cargo. If this was U-864, then she had survived the Norwegian attack, continued her mission, and ended up in Argentine waters for reasons no one could explain. If this was not U-864, then she was a Type 9 XD2, carrying a duplicate designation, which raised even darker questions about where she came from and what she was doing. The German naval records from 1945 are incomplete. The chaos of the war's final months meant that documentation was destroyed, lost, or deliberately hidden. Submarine deployments that were considered too sensitive to record were sometimes logged only in verbal orders. Boats on covert missions operated under radio silence for months at a time. When the war ended and the German Navy surrendered, many operational details vanished with the men who had known them. What is documented is that in the final weeks of the war, several Type 9 X U-boats received orders to evacuate high-value personnel and cargo from German-controlled ports. Destination information was not recorded in any surviving logs. Some of these boats reported their positions as they moved west across the Atlantic. Others simply disappeared from the record. The official assumption has always been that these boats were intercepted and sunk by Allied forces, but Allied records do not account for all of them. Gaps exist in the timeline. Boats that were reported heading south vanished without confirmed kills. And in the decades after the war, rumors persisted that some U-boats had reached South America successfully. The wreck off Argentina suggests those rumors were not entirely fiction. The mission no one talked about. In the final months of World War II, Nazi Germany faced total collapse. The eastern and western fronts were crumbling. The Allies were closing in on Berlin. Adolf Hitler was preparing for suicide in his bunker. And in ports across German-controlled territory, a select group of officers began preparing for what came after. Operation Regenbogen was never an official plan. It existed in fragments, in verbal orders, in the unspoken understanding among those who knew the war was lost. The goal was simple: get valuable personnel, technology, and assets out of Europe before the Allies could seize them. U-boats were ideal for this. They could travel submerged, avoid detection, and reach distant ports without refueling. The rat lines to South America were well established by 1945. Spanish and Portuguese ports served as waypoints. The Vatican issued documents that allowed war criminals to travel under false identities. Argentina, under President Juan Perón, welcomed German refugees with technical skills or financial resources. The country needed engineers, scientists, and industrial expertise to fuel its post-war development. It was not particularly concerned about what those experts had done during the war. Adolf Eichmann reached Argentina in 1950. Joseph Mengele arrived in 1949. These men traveled on ships and planes, using forged papers provided by Nazi escape networks. But others may have used a faster route. Submarines could make the crossing in weeks rather than months. They required no customs inspections, no passenger manifests filed with port authorities. A U-boat could surface off a remote stretch of coastline, unload its passengers and cargo, and disappear again before anyone noticed. Allied intelligence knew this was possible. British and American agencies monitored South American ports closely in the years after the war. They tracked suspected war criminals who had fled Europe. Some were captured and brought to trial. Others vanished into the populations of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Chile. The intelligence files from this period remain partially classified. What has been released suggests that agencies suspected more U-boats had reached South America than anyone publicly admitted. In 1945, U-530 surfaced off Argentina and surrendered to authorities. Her commander, Otto Wermuth, said he had fled Germany to avoid Soviet capture. He insisted his mission was purely one of self-preservation. Argentine authorities interned the crew, and the submarine was eventually transferred to the United States for examination. Official reports stated the boat was empty of significant cargo. Years later, researchers noted contradictions in the timeline. U-530 had departed Europe weeks earlier than Wermuth claimed. Her fuel supply suggested she had made a stop somewhere along the route. Several crew members gave contradictory statements about what the boat had carried when she left Europe. U-977 surfaced off Argentina in August 1945, months after the war ended. Her commander, Heinz Schaefer, published a memoir saying the boat had wandered the Atlantic for weeks while the crew debated whether to surrender. The story raised questions. U-977 had enough fuel for a much longer journey. She had provisions for months at sea, and like U-530, she allegedly carried no cargo of interest. The coincidence of two U-boats showing up off Argentina within weeks of each other was never satisfactorily explained. Rumors circulated for decades that other boats had made the crossing but never surfaced. Some allegedly landed passengers and cargo, then scuttled themselves offshore to eliminate evidence. Others supposedly reached hidden bases along the remote coastline where they could be supplied by sympathetic locals. Most historians dismiss these stories as conspiracy theories. U-boats required significant maintenance and resupply infrastructure. The idea that a submarine could operate secretly in South American waters for any length of time seemed implausible. Then the wreck off Argentina was found. And the conspiracy theories started looking less absurd. If you are still here, you have seen how two U-boats officially surrendered in Argentina after the war, and how intelligence agencies suspected others made the trip in secret. Comment the number 2 below if you are following this investigation. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe and turn on the bell notification so you do not miss what comes next. Your support helps us uncover the stories that governments tried to keep buried. Now, let's talk about what the AI scans found inside that cargo hold. What the scans revealed. The autonomous underwater vehicle that discovered the wreck returned for a second expedition in October 2023. This time, the team brought equipment specifically designed for detailed archaeological documentation. Multi-beam sonar mapped the entire site. Photogrammetry systems captured thousands of overlapping images that could be processed into a three-dimensional model. Robotic arms collected sediment samples and small artifacts from the debris field around the hull. The data processing took months. When the final model was complete, researchers had a digital reconstruction accurate to within millimeters. They could examine every surface of the wreck without ever touching it. They could measure damage patterns, identify construction details, and compare the wreck to archival photographs of Type 1XD2 U-boats. The first revelation was the hull number. Painted on the conning tower, partially obscured by marine growth, was the designation U864. Close examination revealed something unexpected. The paint had been applied over an earlier number that had been partially ground away. Traces of the original marking were still visible in high-resolution scans. The earlier number appeared to be U873, another Type 1XD2 that official records stated had been lost in the North Atlantic in 1945. This confirmed what researchers had suspected. The boat was operating under a duplicate identity. Whether she was originally U873 and had been renumbered, or whether she was a different boat entirely that carried both designations at various points, was impossible to determine from the wreck alone. What was clear was that her identity had been deliberately obscured. The cargo hold revealed more questions than answers. Sealed containers were visible through openings in the corroded hull. Their size and shape did not match standard equipment for mercury transport or weapons components. Some appeared to be document cases, waterproof containers designed to protect papers rather than carry industrial materials. Others were wooden crates reinforced with metal banding, similar to those used for transporting optical equipment or delicate instruments. One container that had broken open during the sinking revealed contents that historians found deeply troubling. Visible in the scans were what appeared to be uniform insignia, personal effects, and boxed sets of documents. This suggested passengers rather than cargo. Type 1XD2 boats could carry passengers, but doing so required sacrificing cargo space. The presence of personal effects indicated someone aboard considered these items worth the sacrifice. The scuttling damage told its own story. The forward torpedo room showed deliberate flooding. Valves had been opened, not blown out by an explosion. The aft compartments showed similar damage. This was not a boat that went down fighting. This was a boat that had been abandoned by her crew using standard procedures. The crew had time to gather personal items, open the flood valves, and evacuate in life rafts. The wreck site included remnants of rafts and flotation devices scattered in the debris field, confirming an organized abandonment rather than a catastrophic loss. Dating the wreck proved more challenging. Corrosion analysis suggested the boat had been on the seafloor for 70 to 80 years. This placed her sinking somewhere between 1943 and 1953. Biological growth patterns were consistent with a wreck that had been submerged since the late 1940s. But without recovered artifacts that could be precisely dated, researchers could not narrow the timeline further. What they could determine was that the boat had not sunk immediately upon reaching Argentine waters. The distribution of debris suggested she had been anchored or resting in shallow water before sliding down to her current position. Sediment layers in the surrounding seabed showed disturbance patterns consistent with a wreck that had moved decades after initial deposition. This meant the boat might have sat in relatively accessible waters for years before storms or seabed instability sent her deeper. If true, this raised an uncomfortable possibility. The wreck might have been visited, emptied of valuable cargo, and then allowed to slip into deeper water where it would be harder to find. Salvage operations in the late 1940s and early 1950s were documented along the Argentine coast, but records of what was recovered were incomplete. If someone had known the location of a scuttled U-boat and wanted to retrieve its contents quietly, the technology existed to do so. The passenger accommodations visible in the scans suggested the boat had carried at least 4 to 6 individuals beyond her normal crew. Type 1XD2 boats had a standard complement of 57 officers and men. Carrying additional passengers would have made conditions cramped but manageable on a one-way mission where return voyage logistics were not a concern. Who those passengers were remains unknown. Comparing this wreck to the documented missions of other Type IND-D2 boats offers disturbing clues. The cargo that was never inspected. Type 1XD2 submarines were designed to carry cargo that conventional surface ships could not safely transport through Allied-controlled waters. The cargo holds could accommodate approximately 250 tons of material, enough for significant quantities of strategic resources, or a smaller amount of extremely valuable technology. U-234, the Type XB mine layer that surrendered to American forces in May 1945, set the template for understanding what these missions might carry. Her manifest included 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, technical drawings for the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, components for V-2 rockets, infrared proximity fuses, and 2 Japanese naval officers who took their own lives rather than be captured. This was a strategic technology transfer that could have changed the war in the Pacific. U-234 was captured by accident. She surrendered because the war ended while she was at sea. If her commander had chosen to scuttle instead of surrender, we would never have known what she carried. The question that haunts researchers is simple. How many similar missions were never intercepted? The Monsoon Group operated Type 1X boats on cargo runs between Europe and Japan throughout the war, but the archives are incomplete. Boats that were reported heading to the Far East sometimes vanished from the record without confirmed kills by Allied forces. A few might have had their orders changed mid-mission as the strategic situation collapsed. If the boat off Argentina was originally assigned to a Far East cargo run, her holds might have contained materials similar to U-234's manifest. Mercury by the ton, optical equipment for rangefinders, and fire control systems. Advanced technology that Japan desperately wanted. But the cargo visible in the scans does not match the standard profile for industrial shipments. The document cases suggest something different. The personal effects indicate passengers who valued certain items enough to bring them on a one-way journey. The mixture of military cargo containers and civilian luggage suggests a mission that was not purely logistical. Post-war intelligence agencies identified categories of evacuees that U-boats might have been used to transport. Technical specialists whose knowledge was too valuable to let fall into Allied hands. Financial officers who managed funds that could finance post-war operations. Intelligence operatives who could continue working from South America, and higher-ranking officials who faced certain execution if captured. One container type visible in the scans matches the dimensions of document cases used by German military intelligence. These cases were waterproofed and would typically contain operational files, code books, or intelligence dossiers. The presence of such cases suggests the mission involved moving information as well as people. Another disturbing detail emerged from the scans. In the aft section of the boat, researchers identified what appeared to be heavy metal containers of a type used for transporting radioactive materials, lead-lined and significantly more robust than standard cargo boxes. A U-boat carrying nuclear materials to South America in 1945 would suggest a level of strategic planning for post-war operations that intelligence agencies had never confirmed. We know from U-234 that Germany was willing to ship uranium oxide by submarine. We know from post-war interrogations that Nazi leadership discussed continuing research programs outside Europe if the Reich fell. We know that Argentina had the industrial capability to process strategic materials if someone brought them the raw resources. What we do not know is whether the Argentine wreck represents a successful delivery that was later scuttled to destroy evidence or a failed mission that never reached its final destination. The cover-up that lasted decades. Allied intelligence services knew about Operation Regenbogen. Intercepted communications in the final months of the war referenced evacuation plans. The OSS and MI6 tracked suspected war criminals fleeing to South America. The capture of U-530 and U-977 off Argentina was investigated thoroughly. Crew members were interrogated. The boats were searched. The official conclusion in both cases was that nothing of strategic significance had been transported. That conclusion may have been accurate, or it may have been the story intelligence agencies chose to tell while pursuing the truth elsewhere. Declassified documents from the 1950s and 60s show that American and British intelligence maintained active operations in Argentina tracking suspected Nazi war criminals. Some operations resulted in arrests. Others resulted in surveillance that lasted years. The scope of these efforts suggests agencies believed more had escaped to South America than the public was told. What makes researchers uncomfortable are the gaps in the declassified record. Files that should exist are missing. Operations referenced in other documents have no corresponding files in the archives. Entire sections of reports remain redacted decades after the events they describe. This level of secrecy is unusual for operations that occurred 80 years ago. The most plausible explanation is that intelligence agencies discovered evidence of successful U-boat cargo missions and chose not to publicize their findings. Admitting that Nazi Germany had successfully evacuated strategic materials and personnel to South America would have been politically problematic during the Cold War. Argentina was not an enemy state, but its relationship with the United States was complicated. Accusing Argentina of harboring war criminals was one thing. Accusing them of accepting nuclear materials or advanced weapons technology was something else entirely. If the Argentine wreck carried uranium oxide or other materials that Allied intelligence wanted to secure quietly, the obvious approach would be to locate the wreck, salvage the cargo covertly, and classify all records of the operation. This would explain why the wreck sat undisturbed in accessible waters for decades before eventually sliding deeper where accidental discovery became less likely. Argentina had reasons to keep quiet. President Perón's government welcomed German refugees because they brought skills and capital Argentina needed. Admitting that some refugees arrived with stolen technology or war materials would have created diplomatic problems. If Argentine authorities knew about U-boat landings along their coast, that knowledge would have been tightly held. The other uncomfortable possibility is that intelligence agencies knew about the U-boat but chose not to salvage its cargo. During the Cold War, both the United States and Soviet Union recruited German scientists regardless of their wartime activities. Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of German technical specialists to America. If agencies learned that certain individuals had reached South America aboard a U-boat, they might have chosen to recruit those individuals rather than prosecute them. The wreck off Argentina emerged into public awareness in 2023, 78 years after the end of World War II. Most individuals who might have been aboard are dead. The intelligence officers who would have managed covert salvage operations are dead. Whatever was in those cargo holds either rests on the seafloor still or was removed decades ago by people who took their knowledge to the grave. The truth beneath the ice. The wreck off Argentina is not alone. Sonar surveys of South American coastal waters have identified multiple uncharted wrecks about the right size and shape to be World War II submarines. Most have not been examined closely. Funding for deep-sea archaeology is limited, and governments are not eager to investigate wrecks that might raise uncomfortable historical questions. But the technology exists now to answer those questions, whether governments want the answers or not. Autonomous underwater vehicles can map wrecks without government approval. Private expeditions can reach depths that were inaccessible 50 years ago. And once images are captured and published, they cannot be suppressed. The Argentine wreck has already forced a reconsideration of what we thought we knew about the end of World War II. If one U-boat made it through carrying duplicate designations and cargo that does not match official records, then the possibility exists that others did the same. How many Type IX D2 boats are unaccounted for in German naval records? How many were reported lost, but never confirmed by Allied kill reports? How many might have reached South America, unloaded their cargo, scuttled themselves, and vanished from history? The official count of U-boats that surrendered in South American waters is 2. U-530 and U-907. Both were investigated. Both were supposedly empty of significant cargo. But if those investigations missed something, Or if other boats came through that never surfaced officially, then the historical record is incomplete. And if the historical record is incomplete about U-boats, what else might it be incomplete about? What other evacuation efforts succeeded that we never learned about? What other strategic materials made it out of Europe in the final weeks of the war? What other war criminals reached safe havens using routes that were never documented? The Norwegian government spent $100 million dealing with one U-boat's mercury cargo. The question is whether anyone will spend the money to investigate this one, or whether she will be left on the seafloor, slowly deteriorating, until whatever evidence she carries is destroyed by time and salt water. 1,200 meters down, the wreck still holds her secrets. The cargo containers have not been opened. The passenger accommodations have not been excavated. The documents that might explain who she was and where she was going remain sealed inside corroding metal, waiting for someone with the resources and determination to bring them to the surface. History does not always reveal itself willingly. Sometimes it has to be dragged into the light, and sometimes, even when we find the evidence, we choose not to look too closely at what it means. The wreck off Argentina is there. The cargo is there. The truth is there. Whether anyone wants to find it is another question entirely.